Hello, everyone. So, happy Pride, first and foremost. This is a very important part of really embracing the fullness of our community. And so, happy Pride, especially considering everything that we have endured and we are currently surviving and thriving through. This is an important moment to stop and celebrate each other and lift each other up. And so this panel is one of a series of panels to really talk about important issues in the community and this very beautiful, large, heterogeneous community of ours. And we want to today address QTBIPOC health inequities, which is a very serious topic. And so I'd like to introduce the panelists, and I will be the moderator. So I'll have the panelists introduce themselves first, and then I'll talk a little bit about myself. But it's really a space where I want to nurture a conversation between our wonderful panelists, and then I'll have a few questions to kind of guide. So let's see, Chris and Kehisha, who would like to go first in introductions, telling our audience a little bit about yourself?
So my name is Kehisha. My pronouns are they, them, she, her. I am the Wabanaki Two-Spirit Alliance Community Coordinator for Nova Scotia and PEI. I have had the wonderful pleasure of working with a series of different communities for international, immigration, Indigenous, Black, queer, in both mental health-based work, research work, community organizing. And it has helped form and change my understanding of mental health and culture, and different ways to best support individuals in a way that feels the best culturally and personally for everyone. Chris?
Thanks, Kehisha. My name is Chris Cochran. I am the Vice Chair of Halifax Pride. I'm also the head of the Trans and Non-Binary Committee for Halifax. My background is first through entertainment and then through activism. I currently work for the Youth Project as a support service educator. So I help one-on-one discussions with youth and their families, and I also do diversity and inclusion training for corporate companies and for education. I really do believe that to make sure that everybody's feeling safe, we have to give as much education as we possibly can. And starting with the doctors, we have to make sure that when we are ready to do whatever part of our transition, that we can go to reliable sources and have the reliable sources of readily available for us.
Absolutely. So thank you, Kehisha and Chris, for being here and sharing your wisdom and your journey with us this evening. So I have some guiding questions, but I really see my role as just sort of in the background, facilitating and highlighting things that you will bring up that far exceed the questions on here. I find that rich conversations lead to that, and so I'm looking forward to that. Quickly, a little bit about myself. Terence Lewis, my pronouns are he, him, his. I'm an associate professor at Dalhousie School of Social Work. I'm also an immigrant to Halifax. I moved here in summer of 2019. So I really have enjoyed listening and learning and becoming part of this community. And so I'll share a little bit more at another time, but I'm just excited to be here tonight, and I want to just jump into this important topic. So let's jump in. So the first question I have to kind of guide is, what are some of the healthcare inequities that QTBIPOC experiences? So what brings us here tonight? What is the relevance of this topic?
I can speak from the trans experience. So for a trans person, I always say your body, your mind, your journey. So there's no physical way, or there's no right way to transition. But unfortunately, because of, for us to get surgery, for us to be able to get put on hormones, there's this archaic value of where if you are transitioning, then you have to look cisnormative for either side, and that's not the case anymore. I kind of find myself in the last few years to be a gender archivist. Oh my God, I can't speak today. A gender archivist, and I believe that there is no right or wrong way to transition. So one of the things that is really painful is that when you go through this process, it's really hard, one, to find a doctor that is WPATH and is able to work with us. And then once we find a doctor that is approved, we have to make sure that they're there to help us and not just trying to push some agenda that they already feel that they need to. And then also being a person of color, on top of that, sometimes the racism is very deep. It comes out in microaggressions, or it comes out in statements that are untrue, and then also the hypersexualization of trans people of color as well is another thing that has happened to me and to others. So it's almost like we have to, be almost ready to put ourselves in a situation that's going to make us feel extremely uncomfortable to be able to get to where we are. And one of the biggest things that I fight against is this fact of that our transition is based on our dysphoria. And it's not true. Everybody has dysphoria. Everybody wants to lose 10 pounds or change their hair color or whatever. We need to also engage in the euphoria side of it and what's going to be on the other side of us transitioning. And I think that doctors need to do that. And I also believe that doctors need to start it right from their education. It shouldn't be an elective. It should be something that they need to know, because if they're going to be going out into the world, they don't know what kind of client they're going to be working with. Unless their specialization, they should have the fundamentals. And I believe fundamentals is making sure that our trans and non-binary community is not only feeling safe when they go to their practitioner, but also knowing that they're going to get the most informative information.
Absolutely, excellent points. And you made some points that I want to come back to later about the really important issue of not just access, but actually being able to trust the competency of the healthcare professional. So you made some really important points. Kehisha.
So when we look at the relation that race and ethnicity play, when we look at mental health in the medical field and medical care, we look at systematic issues, and that a lot of individuals hold very intrusive-based biases and lead to medical-based results where they overlook or they get dismissed. So the predominant group I work with is Indigenous individuals, and one of the biggest hurdles they get a pushback from is the idea that they're not really sick, or this idea that you're just looking for something, and the pushback between stereotypes and outlines, and I found that from all different individuals of color that I've worked with when it comes to the medical field, and my personal experience with the medical field, being someone with chronic pain. You kind of show up and they're just like, are you just looking for medication? Are you actually looking for help? Which means they also, something that we found, particularly when you look at Black women, the pushback that they don't feel pain the same way. And so when they bring up pain, they're often not listened to or acknowledged, and then their pain's not addressed. And it's this constant thing of having to fight to constantly activate for yourself in a system that has been structured to put you lower on the demographic. And then you have the cultural aspect around it, an internal based stigma and internal based ableism that has come out of colonialism, because it was taught that when you come from a point of struggle, that counseling and medical and regular hospital visits are for people who can afford days off. So how could you have taken this entire day to just go seek medical care? Or how could you take today off to just like sit and rest your body when you should have been doing X, Y, and Z? And this push for productivity that is very upheld in capitalism and in structures often ignores the need and protection, and then the systematic racism in our medical system and our health system constantly leaves people unheard and uncared for, which in itself can be very challenging.
Very important points. As you were talking, I was thinking about some of the moves that have been happening among the graduate students in the medical side of Dalhousie, pushing back and bringing up the points that you're bringing up, that even the training of healthcare professionals has some serious gaps around how to help people really be competent and culturally responsive in the healthcare that they deliver. So you bring up some really important points. So the next question that I have is, considering the intersectionality, which both Kehisha and Chris brought up, considering the intersectionality of marginalized identities, what are some of the unique healthcare challenges faced by QTBIPOC individuals who live at the intersections of multiple forms of oppression? So racism, sexism, heterosexism, transgender, transphobia, biphobia, ableism, cisgender bias. Like, there's so many intersections that can be dismissed or even just flat out ignored that people are living with in their narratives. And so can you both speak to that, like those unique pieces of what it means to live at those intersections?
Yeah, so personally, being Black, Indigenous, pan, non-binary, chronically disabled, I had the wonderful pleasure of, in all sarcasm of the word wonderful in this statement, growing up in a hospital-based environment because I was medicalized and put into like obsessive care since I was born. And it is that point where being chronic means the acknowledgement that every time you go to see a doctor, it's just another test to have someone look at you and tell you're not really sick, which can be really invalidating. And then you hit that point of, I also have a lot of doctors looking at me who are like, are you getting the right kind of support at home? And it's just like, well, what do you mean by that? And they're just like, and there comes a list of stereotypes and racist comments and biases that white supremacy has said about people of color communities. And it's just like, no, I have a very supportive community behind me and a lot of people in my community who love me for exactly who I am. And they always seem shocked and like taken back that how could we have such a loving, embraceable-based community? And it's just like, or, so for example, I was born intersex. So I have a really high testosterone level, which means anytime medical stuff comes up or like treatment options, particularly hormone treatment options come up, they have to check my hormone levels and they see how high my testosterone is. And I've had doctors fight with me on just like, how long have you been secretly on testosterone? Where are you getting it from? Who are you buying it from? Why aren't you seeing a doctor about it? And I'm like, I'm not. And it's an immediate line of, I'm lying. Or like, when did I get surgery? And when did I transition? And how long has my marker on my like government IDs been female? Because I must be lying. And it's just like, oh, hi, hello. You were already like pushed back at me when I walked in the door and you figured out I was Black and Indigenous because you saw my paperwork and my status card is a part of my insurance. And now you look at me more medically and you see that like my body doesn't fit into like female or male box, and now there's an additional problem. And it's also like the outline when they want to be like, so your partner type, and it's just like, they're like, oh, so like there must have been a series of men involved, and it's like, well, in pants, so like I love who I love, and never medical professionals, and when they have to ask about your sex life, and then that immediate pushback, like, oh, is that so? And it's just like, we're it's one of those things where it's just like, I've gotten to a point where I'm like, I don't have to tell a doctor that I am intersex in any way, shape, or form. I'm not going to, because I have gotten so many violent faces, and like as a person of color and an Indigenous person, I've been seen as a, we can test on you because who's going to believe you over me? I've had like white doctors come in and add things to my IVs, and I'm like, well, what's that? And they're like, don't worry about it. And I'm like, I know I'm asking. You're putting something in my body, and I would like to know what it is. And I've had them laugh, and they're like, yeah, they're going to believe a Black kid over me and walk out of the room. It's like, great, thank you for the reminder on why I don't trust your system.
So ironically, maybe not ironically, I'm kind of a bookend of Kehisha, because I also was born intersex. I have an extremely high estrogen level in my system. So when I started my hormones, I almost had a seizure because my estrogen levels skyrocketed, and they didn't understand why. And that until that moment, I didn't know that. And it's funny because I had so many blood works. I was in the Navy, so I think I would have found something else during that time, but I never did. And one of the things that we have to go through is a disclosure. We have to basically come out every single time we meet a medical professional. We have to tell them basically who are we, what we have, relive trauma. Some people don't want to listen to us. I had to switch pharmacies because of a doctor that would not believe that, a pharmacist who would not call me by my name, which I hate the word preferred. It's not preferred, it's what it is. Would not call me by my name, and would not help. And then when I went back to the pharmacist, they also didn't help. Ironically, I got to see the pharmacist front row and center when I was speaking at the Pharmacy Association of Nova Scotia, and talking about my incident. Anyways, but one of the things that I feel is really bad is that we still live in a state, I call it polite ignorance here in Nova Scotia, where we like to say we don't have racism, we don't have transphobia, we don't have homophobia because we're not United States, which in the long run and in the short run, it gives so much hardship to our communities because, one, we're not documented. There's no documentation of all of this racism. There's no documentation because it doesn't exist. There's also no paper trail or any way to do it. I had a violent act against me in 2011, and the police literally said to me, well, we've never seen this heart of homophobia before in Nova Scotia, so therefore it can't be what it is, so it has to be something else. And I contributed that back to anti-oppressive, and also to the whole polite ignorance of where people like to say we don't have that in here. So therefore we like to, nitpick and stuff. And then being a person of color, and then being a trans woman of color, like I said before, is that we are hypersexualized, especially by some white male doctors, cis doctors. They see us kind of as a sexual object. One doctor a few years ago, before I found my doctor, who was fantastic, they asked me how long I've been a sex worker for. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong against being a sex worker, but there's an inherited, oh, well, you're trans, so therefore you must be a sex worker. That's not the case at all. And again, like I said, there's no problem with being a sex worker, but that added that, that must be what you are. And when I talked to a doctor about a surgery, the first thing he asked me was, oh, you want to get your cut off? And I was like, you don't even know what the procedure is. So no, I don't want to get my cut off. It, reduce, reuse, recycle is what I say. And then the other thing is it's not even, sometimes it's blatant and sometimes it's undercurrent of homophobia, transphobia. Like, they'll say, oh my God, your hair is so nice. Or I actually heard this from a doctor before was, well, you look the part of a woman, so of course I would like to help you out. Like, what do you mean? So because if I didn't come in here with my makeup and my hair and my nails all done, you wouldn't help me because I didn't reach the stereotype of what you think that I should be. And that dates back to, with colonialism. It dates back to, making sure that everybody is in this uniformity of life. When Canada was colonized, it wasn't about them teaching our ways. It was us being on the same level as them. So therefore, we have to kind of assimilate to what they are believing. And that's what it is. It's all about assimilation by gender, assimilation by appearance, assimilation by healthcare. And there's this thing that people believe that equality is good for everybody. Equality only gives everybody the same chances. Equity is definitely going to do it. I just did a class the other day, and it's like, just picture building, if you had a 9-foot fence and everybody wants to see over, and everybody's given a 5-foot ladder to see over. Well, somebody who's 6 feet, they're going to see over that. Doesn't matter if they have that 6, but the person who's 5 feet, they might not see over. But giving that person a 7-foot ladder and then giving the other person a 5-foot ladder, it's giving them the same level, and they're going to be able to see over that fence. And that's kind of the way everything is within the government and also within the medical field, is that there's a difference between equality, we give everybody the same choice, but some people need more to make sure that we are at that equitable level.
Yes, absolutely. And as we were both talking, there were a lot of things coming up for me. One of them that I really talk with colleagues about, and I also talk with students about it, Dalhousie, about the danger of the assumptions that we put on people in health settings. That a person comes in and is trusting us and they're vulnerable, and all of these biased, stereotyped assumptions, and putting people in these categories instead of being present and really doing the hard work of listening and developing, co-constructing with the person in front of us the authentic story of who they are and what they need in that moment and what they don't need. One of the things that I talk with students about is stop making assumptions. It's like everything that you read in a book and all of these theories and all these articles, they cannot take the place of the individual or the family's story that's in front of you. And so that really, like both Kehisha and Chris, you were giving these examples of people just making these really offensive, violating assumptions. Before I go into the next question, because I think that's a really important point, do you have anything else to add? Because you both brought up some really powerful points just now that I think healthcare professionals need to sit with.
It's one of the balances between like mental health and physical health and like collective full body health. So like I have dissociation identity disorder. I prefer the older edition's name, which was multi-personality, because personally it better explains in a title how I feel. And I, living in a box outline of some things fit really well in a box. For example, when you break an arm and that your treatment is X, Y, and Z, it's a check off the list. In comparison to acknowledging that like people are full circle. So like when we work with individuals who are trans and non-binary and we look at like gender dysphoria, they're just like, we're just gonna look at the gender dysphoria. And it's like, you have to acknowledge the full person outside of just that title outline. Because there's a difference between going, okay, we're gonna work on how you see the world. And with me example, they're like, we're gonna work on taking all of your personalities and try to make them one person. And I'm like, but that's not the problem. The fact that there's multiple pieces of me that all collectively have their own like subconsciousness and collective consciousness isn't what I'm struggling with. What I'm struggling with is X, Y, and Z. And then you have to look at the idea that like plus size or being a larger body type has its own layer in all of this conversation. And so like being a like plus size, Indigenous, Black, queer person walking into a medical field, there is a series of things they see about me. And the whole like push outline of like, oh, so you fill X, Y, and Z box, it must be this. Or you have this mental health issue, so like we're not going to address this physical issue. Or I'm going to ignore all of it and just blame it on the fact that you're large. And then because you're Black, you're just not like, you don't feel pain like the rest of us. You're just giving me a number you think will make me happy. And it's just like, losing 5 more pounds is not going to fix the fact that my spine is a weird shape. But thank you for your collective based understanding of the medical system. And then like, I hold a certain amount of privilege being a lighter skinned Black woman. And I identify strongly with like being a Black woman and a Black Indigenous woman outside of being non-binary, because society sees those 2 titles. And the way in which society views me and interacts with me is through both of those filters, regardless of how my gender falls into it. And Chris, as you were saying, how you physically show when you walk into a medical setting is extremely important. Like I have completely like changed my outfit and taken a shower and like did my hair up and like make sure that I was looking very presentable anytime I have to go to a hospital. Because if I don't look in like I was going to a business meeting, I'm not taken seriously at all. They're just like, you rolled into bed and showed up, you don't really care. And it's like, I shouldn't have to present like I'm going to go sit in court to have a doctor look at me as a person. And it's a frustrating set of dynamics when they also have access to so much of your files and so much of the trauma behind everything. And they decide to ask questions they shouldn't in medical rooms. Or they're like, tell me all about this experience. And you're like, hi, hello. I wasn't going to bring that up today because that's not why I'm here.
Thank you. Yes. And there were so many things that you were saying. I was like, yes, exactly. Absolutely. Chris, do you have any more to add to this part of the conversation?
Just a small thing. Yes, I also am a light-skinned Black woman, and I'm also cis-presenting person as well. So I know that my privilege very much is, a lot of people are like, I've never met a trans person, and I'm talking to them for like an hour, and I'm like, well, so we look like this too. I don't know, there's some identity that people think that RuPaul is to walk into a room. I mean, some of the times I do look like RuPaul, but has nothing to do with my daily of. But when I started my transition, I was very much hyper feminized. My makeup was done, my hair was done. It was one because of dysphoria, because I was afraid of, oh my God, they're going to look at me and give me that look of, oh, that's a man. And then also, again, not taken seriously. It's very much so. And it's very much deep rooted in, again, that assimilation of where you're supposed to look a certain part to get a certain part. There's times where I felt horrible on the inside, physically and mentally, but I've had to present myself as this person that is perfect on the outside, because if I go in there looking less than what is perfect, then they're going to look at that and go, well, that maybe must be the mental issue. Maybe that's why it is. You don't really care that much about yourself. So maybe if you did that a little bit more. I've actually had a male doctor, the same one, who asked me about the sex worker thing. Maybe if I lost a little weight, or maybe if I put a little bit of makeup on, I would make myself feel a little bit better, and maybe I wouldn't have as many problems with myself. So.
Yeah. Every time I hear these stories and my own stories from both personal and professional, I just, sometimes well, not sometimes, a lot of times, it's, I think about the levels of self-protection and sheer exhaustion with the idea of just seeking medical care because of all the ignorance and all the things that can come back at us, and just like, it can be exhausting and also frightening. I had a student when I was working in Minneapolis who identified as part of the transgender community and really wanted to push back on the medical school that was at a university right across from us around their cultural competence. And so they did an amazing research project with, fortunately, one of the few doctors who was on faculty over there, who was part of the community and also doing that work. But they brought up a lot of the issues that both of you have shared about just, it's not just about access, it's about actual cultural competence and trust of this person that calls himself a health professional. Absolutely. So this next question builds on some of the things definitely that we have been talking about. What are some of the healthcare challenges faced by transgender individuals which are unique to their experiences within the QTBIPOC community? So to give me more context, I was on a Council for Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity, and Expression in the US's Council for Social Work Education, and we're all community members. And one of the things that we kept coming back to is the silencing within this larger heterogeneous community of particularly unique voices. And historically, one of them being transgender, the T of that QT BIPOC. Can you speak to unique challenges around silencing, around experiences as a person that identifies as transgender?
Well, first we have to state that there is a patriarchy within the queer community itself. Unfortunately, white cis men, like in every other part of the world, are at that top of that patriarchy. I guess they're the easiest to stomach within the community itself. And then it goes down from there. And unfortunately, like Sylvia Rivera, who was literally the leader for the movement that we call Pride now, and also the leader for AIDS and research, not just for the queer community, but AIDS research in general, was never given. There's a video of her on stage trying to tell them that I've been fighting, I'm crying, I'm doing as much as I possibly can, and they're booing her, and they're, and it's funny because, the generations later, people are cheering her on, and I'm like, but, you were there and you were booing them back then. And it's kind of within that, there's still within our community, we have the LGB group, which doesn't believe that the transgender community should be within the within the community itself. And TERFs, which are trans exclusion radical feminists, but I don't believe they're feminists to begin with. And unfortunately, most of them are lesbians. And it's ironic to me that they are, so quick to deny us and so quick to erase ourselves. But in doing that, you're also erasing your own queer history, because it was a Black trans woman who put everything on the forefront and made sure that we are where we are today. It's people who, like me, who keep it at the forefront at all times, because we know what it's like to be excluded, not only outside of our community, but within our community. So people that are, heteronormative looking or cis presenting or anything like that, they already have this, privilege of being themselves, so they don't have to fight for it as much as we do. Not saying that they don't have disparities, but it's maybe not as much as us. And also the disproportionate death of our trans women, especially trans women of color, is beyond the scope of people's recognition. When I speak of statistics, people are always shocked how disproportionate persons of color, trans people, are killed, not only by police, but sometimes within our own community. And it's disgusting. It's you know, when you're trying to think of, you know, in your community, we already have so many people that are against us. We want people to come in and help us. So you look for people within the community, and they're also, you know, like, we don't want to deal with you either, you know. And another thing is that you almost have, like, you have to be, again, that placating and that, you know, almost gentrifying yourself to make sure that everybody else is comfortable. You're constantly making sure that everybody else in the community is comfortable. You don't want to talk about your transness too much. You don't want to talk about your problems too much. You don't want to put this forward, because then you're being a problem, which means you're disrupting their life. I've had actually people that I know that are like, Black Lives Matter is great, and I'm for it as long as it doesn't affect me. Well, then you're not for it. You're not for it. As a matter of fact, you're worse than the problem, because you're faking and you're making it look, you know, just because you put a post up doesn't mean you're with us. And then people try to take, you know, well, if you're trans, you know, you can be trans and you don't have to talk about it, or, you know, sexualization, you know, on Grindr, on sex apps, on any kind of interpersonal relationship apps or anything like that. We're always like, again, sexualized, and then also, you know, or fetishized. And sometimes it's people, or they call, I've been called the gateway gay, because before my transition, before my surgery, you know, I was best of both worlds, which I think is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. So therefore, they don't think that they're gay, because I'm a gateway to what they're going to be. I'm sorry, I'm nobody's notch on a belt, and I'm also nobody's gateway. I will be your gatekeeper. I will make sure that you're not going to be in our community, and make sure that everybody knows who you are. I'm not for cancel culture, but I am call out culture. So I really believe that if we want to be a community, we have to be a community, because one of the biggest problems that I have in our community is that we want to express, be who you are, whoever you want to be. And then as soon as we're together, we're like, oh, so how do you identify? And it's like, what? How can you say those things in the same sentence? You know, how about, my name is Chris, what is yours? Simple as that. Move on from there.
Yeah, it's definitely that like aspect of just like having to always be on. And you're always in that performance seat of just like, I can't turn off and step back. I always have to be, hey, the way in which I identify means that I am spending every moment trying to showcase something to have it be validated and have it be outlined. And this like pull and throw of like constantly having to be aware of what is and what is not, like what spaces are and are not safe, because so many of them are not. And the like, yeah, so like the internal problems within each of our communities, because the idea is like, you can be queer and still really transphobic. And the amount of like, the amount of people and like my existence and throughout my life I have met who are just like, will like see me as a woman in female dominated based spaces and then talk to me and say something, and I'll be like, really? And they're like, oh, you're, and I'm like, I am a part of the thing you are complaining about. I am one of the people. And they're like, oh, and it's like the idea that we're currently fighting with parts of the queer community about keeping the T in LGBT, I find to be so disheartening, because trans individuals have been as such an active part of speaking out and holding space and changing policies and making spaces so much more accessible and accepting of everyone else in the process. And they have done all the work and are still at the bottom of the totem pole. And it's like, no. And then so like other people are like, okay, I got my rights. And like, I find this predominantly with like predominantly like with like cis males and predominantly cis white males, is they got their rights and then they walk off. And then like cis women got their rights predominantly cis white women got their rights and they walked off. And I was like, excuse me, hello, hi. The rest of us are still here. And like, we didn't get to stop fighting because, yeah, we fought for you and you got something, congratulations. But we also now need you to take your point of privilege and your point of power that you have to make sure we don't get left behind.
Yeah.
And it's not like pushback to be like, and I get this pushback predominantly from like white gay guys in the community, predominantly white, where they talk about their inner Black woman.
Yeah.
And I have spent so much of my energy growing up being like, what?
Yeah.
Excuse me? Just, and like, the idea that people are like, well, they're like being queer makes you marginalized, so you can't just like, you can't possibly also be racist. And it's like, there is so much racism within the queer community that is not being addressed because of the point of privilege of like the tower of like privilege in the queer community. Yeah. And this like pull on that, like, you're supposed to be able to separate out it. I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't get to choose if I'm Black or Indigenous, or I have the wonderfulness of that, like when I walk out in public, people assume I'm a cis female. So unless I talk to you and tell you I'm non-binary, or tell you, or you found somewhere that I'm intersex, there is no hate around my gender. Because people are just like, it's a girl, it's a woman, cool. We'll harass them for being a woman, but like, we're not gonna harass them for being everything else they are under their gender and sexuality, because it's automatically assumed I'm hetero. Mm-hmm. And so then you like hit this point of like, in queer spaces, they're like, oh, you're a woman. And then it's just like, no. Or it's, I'm going to steal like your vernacular and like steal parts of Black culture and then like throw in your face to be like, well, I was called this younger, and it's still one of the biggest insults that like little me had heard that wasn't a slur, and it was being called an Oreo. And this idea that because I fit the academic world, I was white on the inside. And it's like, I'm not trying to be a white person. Trust me, no. And like, that was something that was said to me both by like the colored community and the white community. And I'm like, oh, sad face. And then you hit medical, that's just like, I walk in very well educated about all the things I have, because no one else was going to diagnose me. And I had to like demand to get tests and like go in and like fight with doctors to get treatments and to have them register any parts of my identity and like fight for like any part of like my acknowledgement of being like, what's wrong and what can I do about it? And this medication isn't working, but I want to know why it's not working. And that's how I ended up finding out I was intersex. Was I went in and I had been through like 16 different types of birth control. And I'm like, I want to know why this isn't working. And I straight up requested and required. And I went to so many different doctors until a doctor finally tested my hormones. And they're like, oh, you have really high testosterone. How long have you been on T? And I'm like, what? Rewind. Can I see those? Can I see this hormone outline of mine? But yeah, so it's this idea that you're constantly in a position of fighting to exist and having to be on to be taken seriously, and then having to fight within the community to have people stop stereotyping you. And then you're fighting with people within your community because they're transphobic or they're biphobic or they're internally homophobic. And it's just like, hi, hello. I understand that we come from very different places in the world and that there are many things I've had to deal with that you will never have to deal with. But I would like that you take a moment and acknowledge that even though you don't experience it, it is still a problem.
Yes, amen. There's so many, yeah. I'm just like, all these questions are going in my head. I'm like, yes, exactly. And then there's that, and what about that? So thank you. This is very important. And I hope that people sit still and listen to what you're sharing in a deep reflective way, where they realize that in order to unpack what both Kehisha and Chris, that both of you are sharing, is that's a journey. That's not a, okay, I'm gonna click this on, watch it, and then that's it. It's a, let it sink in. Absolutely. Thank you. I'm realizing the time, so I'm gonna check my own desire to just like go on like, yeah, what about this? What about that? But these are such good points. Let's see. The next question that I have, yeah, I wanted to make sure to ask this question because it's the reality that is affecting everyone for the last year and a half and ongoing. So the question is this: amidst the global pandemic of COVID-19, what concerns do you have about the impacts on QTBIPOC health and our access to quality healthcare?
Well, one of the biggest things is that mental health is a big thing. And I find that within the COVID epidemic, anything that is now heightened. So if you were depressed beforehand, you're heightened. If you had anxiety, you're heightened with anxiety. And also, it is used as an excuse to not treat QT/BIPOC people now, because you're like, oh, we're backlogged because of COVID, or we can't take any new patients because of COVID, or blah blah blah. So these people that are inherently racist, they're now using COVID as an excuse of not why they have to do what they have to do, and also the isolation of it. Being a queer person, and I deal with a lot with queer youth, and some of those queer youth are now stuck in a house with potential people that are physically and mentally abusive towards them because of their identity and the gender or their sexuality, and they are because of that they are not getting the health care that they need. So it's making things so much worse. And it's also giving people a reason and an example of why they don't have to help us, because, well, it's not because I'm racist, or it's not because I don't have the time to deal with you, or because I don't want to deal with you. It's because of COVID. The fear of unknown is one of the biggest problems within the healthcare. Their excuses, well, I don't want to mess up, or I don't want to use the wrong pronoun, or I don't want to do this. The thing is, I tell in every class that I ever teach is that you're going to mess up. It's what you do afterwards. If you continue to do that behavior, then you're not learning, you're not educating yourself, and therein lies the problem. And with this COVID epidemic, it almost it came down on the people that are unemployed. Unemployment rates skyrocketed. People that were having problems getting a job before are now exponentially not getting their jobs. Also when it comes to healthcare, because we have to prioritize, and unfortunately, another word for prioritize usually means we're going to prioritize the white cis man over the transgendered person, and it gives them a reason not to have to deal with us, and it gives them a reason not to have to do. And even though we're kind of coming out of I don't want to say fully out of it, because that Delta likes to knock right on the door there. It's giving people an excuse to not have to deal with us, and it's also giving an excuse by radical rightists that the reason why we have COVID is because the queer people. We've changed the atmosphere. We're bringing tornadoes. We bring COVID. If that was the case, we wouldn't have to worry about war, because you just put a queer person on the front lines and say, send a tornado, and then be done. You know what I mean? So it's just, and that's how ridiculous it is to hear these things coming at us. And, they'll find any reason to blame it on the queer community for everything. The sky is blue, it's because of the queer community. The sky is gray, it's because of the queer community. So it's just, it gives, feeds into that delusion that they think that they have this power over us, and they're starting to see that power slip slightly from their hands. and they've never had that. And also COVID was a great equalizer. So those people that had those jobs and had those positions and had the healthcare and had those places and had everything, everybody was suddenly put into this one place all over the world. It was like, it doesn't matter unless your name is Jeff Bezos, but I'm not going to get into that. You know, you were kind of like put at this level, and you were seeing for the first time, though, you know, white cis men and white cis women going, oh my God, why are you not freaking out? It's like, well, we're not freaking out because this is the norm for us. So we're used to dealing with the epidemic that is life. Now you're seeing what is just a snippet of what our life is. Because once this is over, you're going to go back to your normal life, and we're still going to be in the same position, if not worse, than we were beforehand.
Yes. Yes. Kehisha, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's like looking back at that like hierarchy of society, and even like the hierarchy within queer communities, and within like when we look at race and ethnicity, it's we also look at like ability and like people with different ability outlines, and how predominantly like queer people of color with disabilities have been massively pushed off to the side. And so one of the things COVID did was it did this really scary thing that was the hierarchy of treatment, which then all of a sudden meant if you had pre-existing conditions or you had anything in like the records or books, all of a sudden healthcare professionals were just like, no one wants to see you. No one wants you in their office. No one wants the idea that like, you may be immunocompromised. I don't want you in any of my spaces because it means you're more likely to pick something up. And it's like, well, then you should be more careful about your policies about making sure your health space is a safe place and sanitary. And it was the idea that like the amount of individuals with disabilities and a very high amount of people of color with disabilities all of a sudden immediately lost all of their support systems. Like most people I know who had like a caseworker who like came to their homes, who like helped them do things or helped them like grocery shop, and all these services just stopped. Home care workers weren't going into people's homes anymore, and the first people to lose it were like queer disability people of color. They were the first people knocked out of the system, and they often don't have the historical wealth attached to white supremacy. Like that white supremacy has been very picky on who receives, to have the extra funds to pay for private, because private home care is extremely expensive. And also, like, because the education system is inherently racist because of colonialism, a lot of people, regardless of field, are taught very homophobic, transphobic, racist, sexist beliefs. And a lot of people never have to challenge those because it's not something they're constantly like interfacing with. Which meant when those kind of people come into your home, especially for like queer, trans people of color, when you have a disability and you have to let someone into your home to come service you, you are in a very vulnerable position for that person to hurt you. And like that part of healthcare has a severely large violent rate that is never reported and never included when we look at healthcare and violence, because it's not in a structured setting. And COVID, when those systems were taken away, it became a different kind of power dynamic and a different kind of violence, where it's just like, you went to that home and you realized they were gay, you could just say, oh, I didn't feel it was clean enough. And now all of a sudden you could just say they're not up to COVID standards in their household, and you have other related reasons to be like, And like we had at one of the hospitals during our height of COVID, who gets oxygen machines first? And there was people paying hospitals because they had the financial resources to gain access to those devices, which meant other people who had come in, predominantly people of color, were having it taken away from them as a part of their treatments in order to give it to someone else.
Very, very powerful points. I'm glad that we got to that. I realize that we're running towards the end of our time. I think we're supposed to end at 8, but I'm glad that I got to that because that's the reality that we're living in. On top of all of the other things that we're dealing with, the last year and a half has put another multi-dimensional layer on the inequities that we experience in the community. And so I'm really glad we got a chance to talk about that. I know we're short on time. I just wanted to put a note out there for the audience to consider too. One of the things that I've been thinking about around the impact of COVID that goes to a point that Chris made too about particularly youth being stuck in dangerous home situations because of the reality of COVID and the restrictions. One of the things that I'm hoping that all of healthcare really seriously considers is the multiple ways that that will unfold, even as we get a handle on COVID, hopefully. One of the things that comes up for me is loss, grieving, and the delayed burial processes that go on for families, and then how that plays into all of the other extreme vulnerabilities around safety, around anti-LGBTQIA stigma that people are experiencing already in their families, adding on top of that all of these layers of loss related to this pandemic. So just for people to think about that, really sit with what the multiple ways that that can unfold. Yeah. So as we end, because I want to make sure to leave time for both of our wonderful panelists to just share your final thoughts about, I have 2 questions, but I'll kind of pull it to the, kind of pull them together. What are your hopes? We've talked a lot about what we face. What are your hopes for change? What are your hopes for change? I'll just leave it with that and share your voices around that.
Yeah, I think it could be a whole separate conversation between like trans identities and grief and burials. Just like the implication of the amount of like dead naming and misgendering that happens when people pass. And because COVID has made numbers and names much more collectively available to different people, it's that outline of like, right, the people who didn't accept or acknowledge who you really were are now putting those old pieces of yourself and dressing them up the way they saw you as a part of your burial process. Okay, I hope we get to a point where predominantly our trans youth growing up now can grow up in healthy, supportive, collective systems that acknowledge them for who they are.
Like I said earlier today at the flag raising, is that I do believe that queer youth are going to inherit Earth and they're going to make it a better place for us to live in. And hopefully that the world is going to be there for them to do so because of the current state that everything is. But one of the biggest things that I think that needs, and I hope, and I'm working myself towards this, is that transgender identities, sexuality, and non-binary community, all that needs to be taught in school for medical professionals, for education professionals. If you are going to be running into all of these people, by not doing this education, you are already saying you're going against your own oath, which is at first do no harm, because you are not having the education behind you. So therefore you can say, oh, I don't know that, or I don't want to know that, or I don't know that. And it's giving that already starting off to a bad habit. And it's a form of racism, it's a form of transphobia, it's a form of homophobia, because you're like saying, well, those people are not worth my education that I am teaching and I'm getting, so therefore I don't have to do it. It would be like a surgeon saying, you know what, I'm only going to learn how to use a scalpel. I don't want to know how to do anything else, because that that's only part of the actual solution. You need to know the whole part and the whole. So my hope is that youth not only have the ability to inherit the earth, but make sure that we actually have the earth and the world that we live in available for them to do so, and hope that our medical professionals will get their act together, not just here in Nova Scotia, but I mean worldwide, when it comes to non-binary, trans, queer people. And we need to get rid of those archaic thoughts of you need to look the part to be the part.
Amen. Amen. This has been a tremendous blessing to just listen and learn and be together. I'm realizing that we're at the end of our time together. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And for the audience, just listen, learn, and reach out, connect, ask for help, ask for guidance. Take a chance and build bridges. I know it's very scary out there, but we will get through this together. We have to get through this together. So thank you.